Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks as always for attending our webinar. I'm really excited. Today's webinar, the topic, Microsoft Teams, it's something we are seeing every day, having conversations with clients every day. And I think if you're in the category of folks who, well, clearly, if you're on this event today, this is something that is timely and something that you're dealing with. So I look forward to the presentation. I look forward to content from Dan and Jeremy. And before we get started, just know, as always, if you have questions, please put those in the chat or question box, and we'll make sure we get to those. And if for some reason we don't, they are recorded, so at the end of the presentation, we'll reach out to you afterwards. And at the end of at the close of the presentation, there'll be a survey that goes out to help capture information. And if there's any next steps, we can certainly help there. So as we get started, and Kristen, I'm unable to advance for some reason. There we go. So what do I want to accomplish today? I mentioned that before, provide insight information that is new to you perhaps. I know we're all using Teams and we're collaborating, but perhaps some insight that you don't have today. To make sure that the information is relevant, especially if you have a current pressing need. And just demonstrate our ability to partner with you. We want to have this session, we want to provide education, but we want to provide a roadmap too, if that's something you're trying to do. And Kristen, if you could advance, please, I think. Thank you. So today we'll have introductions. We will talk about Teams direct routing, really the considerations of direct routing and the different Microsoft call plans. In there, we'll talk about licensing, different strategies, how it works. We'll talk about the importance of Teams governance, and Jeremy will have a brief demo on that. And lastly, we'll have Q&A and resources available to you. So how can we simplify collaboration in our company? Importantly, how can we leverage the current investments in our communication infrastructure while still maximizing the ease of use of Teams? And after doing all of this, really, how do we securely and efficiently manage this environment? So to help you achieve those goals today, we'll talk about those best practices and share those real world experiences from our experts. Thank you, Kristen. So what are we seeing in the field today? A few things from the collaboration side. That first bullet, man, we've passed that hurdle, and you'll see in a moment the data, but a significant adoption of Microsoft Teams for internal collaboration. And then along with that, everything goes part of that suite. So the file share, chat, all those things. Still confusion between Microsoft calling plans and direct routing, and hence today's webinar. A lot of customers asking, what is the licensing required for calling? I mentioned this a second ago. A lot of our customers on this webinar have a current UC platform. So how do I maximize that and achieve the functionality of Teams? And related to that, a lot of customers have existing video collaboration platforms. We're used to this experience today of this Teams, one push button. How do we try to get that into our environment? And second set of questions, more on the governance standpoint, we found customers deploy Teams almost organically. The pandemic hit. We didn't get to do a lot of the planning and rollout we typically do, and we were using this, the next week. And Teams sort of became the Wild West and difficult to manage. That's where Jeremy will come in. So we'll talk about how to leverage the different tools in Microsoft to provide those governance, security, and different policies. Thank you, Kristen. So what about you guys? We had some registrations before the event and had some great responses. So are you currently using Teams for internal communications? I would say it's a total surprise, but I've been doing these events since maybe May of the pandemic, and that number probably was a 60 to 70%. We did this event maybe back in February of this year, and that was about an 80% number. So 100% of everyone on this call anyways is using Teams. Would you like to extend Teams communication outside of your organization? A little over half are saying, yeah, geez, I'd love to be able to do that within Teams. And do you currently have a premise UC platform that you'd like to integrate with Teams? One of those things I mentioned before. So over 3/4 are saying, yeah, I've got this infrastructure, I have cost in this, I want to leverage what I have today with Teams. Do you wish to limit the creation of teams to certain users or roles? That'll make Jeremy feel good. So 9 out of 10 of you saying, yeah, we should do that. These next two, Jeremy, I hope this doesn't make your heart skip a beat a little bit. Is enforcing consistent naming conventions for teams important to you? So perhaps Jeremy can expand upon that later on. Jeremy, I'm sure you will a little bit here. So next question. Does your company have a plan to protect confidential and sensitive data in Teams? And again, a fairly small number. I'm not sure if we didn't understand the question, or if truly there's not a plan for that, or we don't know how to do it. And if that's the case, certainly we can help, and that's what Jeremy will provide some insight. So a little bit before we get started here, for those that haven't been part of these webinars, are not current clients, New Era, 40 offices worldwide, 1,600 plus employees, and that really is the entire spectrum, right? That's engineers, designers, technicians, sales professionals. We are going to help you from that very first initial design through post-implementation and support. And Kristen, if you go to the next slide, that'll sort of graphically show the different areas of our company. Today, we'll be focusing a lot on the top left and then middle of data networking collaboration. But just know that in our suite and in our offerings, very strong security practice, very strong managed service and cloud service offering. So just please know that you can talk to your New Era rep, and we can certainly help you in those different areas as well. Specifically to the Microsoft practice, just a very quick overview. I mentioned before our ability to go from that initial design assessment through support. From a Microsoft standpoint, we really try to be very holistic. I feel very strongly that clients are consuming Microsoft today. They're paying for it today. If we can leverage all those tools and assets available to us for things like collaboration and security and design and workflow, that's really our goal. So you'll see some of the focus areas here, but just know that we have unlimited resources at our disposal. We're a Microsoft Gold partner, and we can help you along that journey. So again, my name is Joe Paquette. I'm the Director of Business Development in the Northeast, and I'll be joined here with Dan Marshall and Jeremy. And Dan, I'll kick it over to you now for introductions.
Sure, yeah, Joe, thank you, appreciate your time. So I'm Dan Marshall, I'm the National Director of Unified Communications for New Era. I've been doing this about 20 years. I started off as a network engineer, got into UC around 2003, and here I am working for New Era in different iterations for about 12, 13 years now. So next slide, please. So the goal of today is really to talk about Microsoft calling options focused really on direct routing. Microsoft has some different calling options, which we'll kind of touch on quickly, but I'm not going to spend too much time going through them. Again, the purpose of this call is really kind of to give an overview of Teams with direct routing and the benefits to your organization that it offers. So some key terms to quickly go through for anyone that's not familiar with them. So we'll be talking about SIP quite a bit. So SIP is a signaling protocol that you use to establish calls through the internal network, PSTN, various sources and things like that. Session Border Controllers, SBC, that's really a SIP gateway. It's what allows interop between your on-prem PBX or Microsoft Teams and the PSTN. Basically shuffle SIP around through different segments. Direct routing, again, Microsoft's method for allowing customers to kind of bring their own PSTN. We're going to touch on that. And quickly, PBX on-prem system for providing dial tone, and then PSTN is your public switch telephone network. So When you make a call to a cell phone or to a relative's house, that call typically goes from wherever you're located across the PSTN to its final destination. So those are some of the key terms we're talking about today. So really quickly, it's worthwhile noting there's a history behind Microsoft calling. So they've got a pretty strong heritage of providing calling in different iterations. And it first started in October of 2007 with Office Communicator. So that was the first application from Microsoft that provided calling features. Wasn't very full featured, but it got the job done and provided very basic call functionality. About 4 years later, they released Microsoft Link. That added a lot of enhancements and some PBX functionality to the Microsoft calling application. And then 4 years after that, they released Skype for Business. And then in 2018, that became Microsoft Teams with direct routing. Originally started off just as Microsoft Teams. But there's been an evolution about every 3 or 4 years of Microsoft enhancing the unified communications applications that they offer to their customers. Next slide, please. So those that aren't familiar with Microsoft Teams, which I'm hard-pressed to think anyone in this group is not, but it's their collaboration app. It provides point-to-point chat features, desktop sharing, audio, video conferencing, very basic PBX features, and collaboration spaces. So it's a very popular collaboration tool across a lot of organizations now. So next slide, please. Very high level, some of the calling features that are available within Teams once you enable the calling and telephony licenses is dial pad to make PSTN calls if you want. It does do native client audio and video dialing. And using direct routing and some other methods, you are able to integrate it with your existing on-prem system. So again, just a quick overview. We're going to get into more detail on this stuff, but just to kind of give everyone a highlight of what Microsoft Teams can do from a calling perspective. All right, so this slide's a little bit old. They haven't released an updated one, but I think it really drives the point home, the adoption of Teams. And I think everyone can kind of see between March and April of last year, Teams adoption skyrocketed. And it continues to grow, so the daily active user count keeps going up and up. It's kind of become the default collaboration tool for many organizations. So, I mean, here at New Era, almost daily, I'm having conversations with customers that say, we have an on-prem system now, whether that's Avaya, Cisco, Mitel, you name it. We've got a lot of remote workers now. Maybe they don't have a great remote worker option for their on-prem system. How do we get Teams to start making phone calls? That's where direct routing is going to come into play, and that's what we're going to focus on in the next coming slides. So with Microsoft, you have a few calling options. There is a third one now that we're not going to touch on today. But with Microsoft, if you want to be able to make PSTN calls, you can either use the Microsoft calling plan, you can use what's called Operator Connect, which we're not going to talk too much about today, and then the direct routing option. To get either of those to work, if you have an E1 or E3, or depending upon what vertical you're in, if it's an A1 or an A3, you need to purchase a telephony license. And that telephony license gets you the dial pad on Teams that allows you to be able to make calls. On top of that, you need to either have a Microsoft calling plan or direct routing configured to enable the PSTN dialing from that dial pad once it's enabled. If you currently have an E5 license, A5, G5, whatever that is, you already have the telephony license enabled. And at that point, you just need to choose either the Microsoft calling plan or configure direct routing for your organization. And now we're going to get into really what direct routing is, why it's beneficial for your organization, and an overview of the capabilities that it might have for you. All right, so direct routing, like I mentioned briefly before, is Microsoft's bring your own PSTN. So really, what does that mean in layman's terms? If you have an existing carrier you like to work with, or you find the Microsoft calling plans cost prohibitive due to the size of your organization or any other number of reasons, you can implement direct routing to provide that PSTN services. And we'll touch on this in the next slide a little bit more, but basically how it works is that you have an on-prem SBC that you register with Microsoft Teams, and using that registered SBC, you are able to provide PSTN dialing for your organization. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a high-level overview of a pretty common customer scenario that we see where there's a HQ and there's a redundant data center where they've got geo-diversity for their applications and services. And what they've done is they've installed some session border controllers to provide both on-prem integration to their existing PBX as well as PSTN calling from Microsoft Teams. And so essentially how that works is those two session border controllers that are located at HQ and data center both register up to Microsoft Teams. In this particular example, we only have one example, which is Jose at customer.com. He's the only Teams user right now currently. if he were to go and make a phone call to Allison at extension 1005 or Eric at 2005, it comes down the Microsoft Teams trunk. It'll hit the session border controller, and then the session border controller recognizes that, oh, this is a call for Allison, it's a call for Eric, routes it to the on-prem system. Similarly, if Jose were to call tax support, for example, with Microsoft or a vendor of his choice, and he makes that same phone call, the call comes down from Microsoft Teams, hits the session border controller. The session border controller goes, oh, this is a PSTN call, routes out to the PSTN. So those SBCs can provide multiple functions. If desired, and you don't want to have an on-prem system anymore, you simply make the bottom part of that diagram go away. So you can keep your SBCs at your location. You can host them at the New Era Colo facility. There's various options to host those session border controllers, which we'll talk a little bit about further down. But long story short, the SBCs play a crucial role in providing direct routing that allows you to do on-prem integration with Teams and also provide lower cost PSTN calling options for Microsoft Teams. So just a quick comparison between the two calling plans. Really what it boils down to for the most part is going to be cost. So many customers find the Microsoft calling plan to be pretty expensive, and most customers we see sub maybe 50 users, 20 users can find some benefit with the Microsoft calling plan because it's a true cloud solution at that point. There's no on-prem equipment required, and you really handle everything through Microsoft. A couple of things of note though, if you do go with the Microsoft calling plan, you have to port or move all of your numbers over to Microsoft, right? So at that point, Microsoft doesn't truly own your numbers, but they're going to hold it and be responsible for all of your business telephone numbers. Conversely, direct routing provides you the ability to maintain ownership of all your numbers, so you're not porting anything over to Microsoft. You get to choose whichever carrier you want. So if you're currently under contract with a carrier of your choice, let's say it's AT&T or Verizon, you get a 2 or 3 year contract, you don't have to get rid of that. You can keep that. If you like your carrier, for example, and you want to keep using them, maybe you got some good relationships, direct routing gives you the option to keep those as well. Just for a comparison, and this is like a list price value, for our customers when we host direct routing as a service for them, meaning we host your SBCs in our data centers and provide all the PSTN services. By comparison, our list price is about $8 per user per month, right? That cost goes down if you own the SBCs and you host them at your facility and bring your own carrier services into them. So again, just kind of a quick comparison, about $4 per user at a minimum is likely what you'd be looking at saving going with direct routing. And this is just a quick pricing breakdown. So we did talk about it's $8 for the telephony user license, and then $12 for the Microsoft calling plan, which is about $20 per user per month. And by that same comparison, if you went with the direct routing as a service through New Era, it's $16 per user per month. Again, list price. And the virtual SBCs that you need to get direct routing to work start around $800 for a virtual instance for about 20 concurrent calls. So pretty cost effective, all things considered. All right. So we're going to get into some of the direct routing options now to show you some of the capabilities and the flexibility you have with direct routing. So in this particular example, we're going to go with a customer-provided SBC and existing PSTN services. So in this example, the customer says, hey, we want to enable Microsoft Teams with direct routing. We also want to make sure that we have capabilities to call our existing on-prem system. So we also want to make sure our on-prem users can call Microsoft Teams users and so on and so forth. So the customer in this case installs an SBC at their location. You register the trunks up to Microsoft. You configure the calling plan on the existing on-prem system as well as the SBC. And at that point, you're able to make calls like I showed in the previous diagram between the Teams users and the on-prem users with all of the PSTN services being provided by the existing telco connection at the customer. So in this particular example, probably worth mentioning, I don't know if I touched on this, probably not. So New Era is an FCC regulated SIP carrier provider. So we're able to offer really cost-effective, super reliable SIP trunks to our customers. In another configuration, what we do is provide kind of a co-managed direct routing solution for our customers. So there could be an example where you want to keep your on-prem system kind of isolated from Teams, but provide some interop with the direct routing services. New Era is able to provide some SIP trunking services into your SBCs while also providing the on-prem integration. And in this co-managed solution, you own the SBCs on your location. New Era can work with you to manage the SBCs or to deliver SIP trunking services in place of or in addition to the current PSTN services that you're currently using. And lastly, this is where you have a hosted SBC or a New Era direct routing as a service. This is pretty valuable for customers that don't want to have any equipment on-prem anymore. So they want to be everything in the cloud. They want to get the cost effectiveness of direct routing without the hassle of having equipment on site to worry about or to worry about managing. So in this particular scenario, the customers will come to us. We stand up your dedicated instance of your session border controllers in our data centers. We deliver all the SIP trunking services and provide a turnkey solution to your Microsoft Teams calling plan using direct routing. So again, just to recap, a direct routing service hosted through New Era data centers. And truth be told, if you had Azure, AWS, you can put these SBCs in your data center of choice. So by all means, don't think that you can only use this type of topology through New Era. Obviously, we'd love to work with you and sell you on this solution, but it's not a requirement. This same type of topology will work in Azure and AWS for you. But in that case, terminate the SIP trunks of your choice into the Azure AWS service, and then configure the trunks in Microsoft Teams accordingly. All right, and just to quickly recap, so I know I touched on the fact that New Era is a FCC-regulated SIP trunk provider. We work with all different kinds of SBC manufacturers. We lead with Ribbon. We also work with audio codes. We have a long history with Cisco, Avaya SBCs. So it really is kind of your choice of what you're comfortable with. We have a team that can handle really any of the SBCs you might be able to throw at us. There's a few on here that are not listed that we can work with, like Perimeter and things like that. But we've got a lot of flexibility that can meet your budget, your expectations, and really the features and functionalities that you're looking to get out of your direct routing project. And lastly, it's worth noting, I just want to throw this up there, that we do a lot with video interop in Microsoft Teams. So many of our customers that are moving into Microsoft Teams exclusively have an issue where customers they may work with, vendors they may work with, when they try to do a video call into a Microsoft Teams bridge, they're unable to. That's because Microsoft uses a closed proprietary protocol for their audio and video. So anytime you want to have a Cisco unit, Polycom unit, Zoom unit, anything like that, call into a Microsoft Teams meeting, you have to have some type of interop. So the two solutions we typically lead with are a PEXIP solution, a Polycom solution. So just closing out with anything related to Microsoft Teams, whether it's calling, direct routing, doing video interop, New Era has all the resources available to help you make a smooth transition and a successful project. I think that's it for me, Joe.
Yeah, Dan, I would add a few things to that. That last slide, absolutely. We're chatting with clients all the time, and I've seen firsthand the ability for us to go in and do that and really take what may have been a complex environment beforehand and make that Teams experience for the end user. So yeah, without a doubt, the solution is great. And Dan, a couple things. One I wanted to ask, and maybe just a second question after, but can you, you and I were on a call a while ago, and I thought it was very interesting. This was an enterprise customer with a call center platform, a premise system, with a huge adoption of Teams internally, wanting to potentially use Teams everywhere, including the call center. And I thought the conversation was very straightforward. You were saying, but potential for the call center, not a way to go, but your strategy to them was to get to the cloud first. Is that, can you just touch upon that and the sort of thought process there?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to note that Microsoft Teams does not have a call center option. There's no native call center. So with Cisco and Avaya and many other solutions, they have their call processing application, but they also have a legit call center. You queue calls, prioritize calls, go to different groups, you get all the reporting, all the native call center stuff that you're used to. Doesn't exist in Microsoft Teams. The solution we lead with typically with Microsoft Teams for customers that do have call center requirements is Five9s. They're a cloud-based contact center solution that they work really well, got a great reliability, awesome track record. In the story that Joe's talking about, the customer got caught in a DR situation where they lost their colo. They were down in Texas, and with the freeze that they had last year, all the power outage issues, like they went down, and their business runs on the call center. So the knee-jerk reaction was to say, well, we're using Teams right now. Let's get everyone moved over to Teams. And then the question came up, well, what about your call center, right? So where I'm going with this is if you're looking towards moving to the cloud, oftentimes it might make the most sense to get started with your contact center. And the reason being is that all cloud, well, I shouldn't say all, most cloud-based contact centers are PSTN driven, or I'm going to say E164 driven. What that means is they're not attached to any particular number. So when five nines, for example, are in Cisco WebEx Contact Center, which is another great option, the agents are actually configured with a telephone number, not an actual phone. So in one instance or one day, they could put their cell phone in. If they're in the office on an Avaya system, they could put in their Avaya DID. If they go to a relative's house and don't have cell service, they could put the relative's home telephone number in. But long story short, Joe, to kind of tie all this in together, getting Contact Center up into the cloud decouples everything from your on-prem system. So when you start moving everything up into Microsoft Teams, you've already got the really complex stuff sorted out.
Awesome, thank you. And then the second question was going to be, or perhaps you can elaborate a little bit for me. We've been working closely together with a lot of clients, having the same conversation, and the natural next step is to do a POC.
Mm-hmm.
It's an easy engagement from our perspective. It's a fixed cost, typically engagement with a really strong set of deliverables. Can you just elaborate on what that would be?
Sure, yeah. So the standard package for like a 20 to 50 user POCs, like $7,200, and what that gets you is Microsoft SBC and really your on-prem PBX resource. So if you have Avaya, Cisco, like really whoever it is, we assign a team member to handle all the different technologies involved with this. In addition to the PM, also included in that is a virtual SBC with 25 session licenses, good for about 90 days. Along with the end user training, adoption guides, and the PM to make sure that you can get a true Microsoft Teams calling experience working. Additionally, we also include a New Era SIP trunk for PSTN services with that. We have some customers that want to get test DIDs that we allow them to use over that SIP trunk. Other customers say, no, we want to keep our same extensions, but we want to make sure that Microsoft Teams only goes out through the SIP trunk and not through the on-prem system. We can make that work as well. So long story short, it's a full service POC that we do for you, everything from PM to engineering to user adoption. The only thing that is not included is the licensing for Microsoft. So if you have 20 users, 50 users, you can get demo telephony licenses from Microsoft. Might be a topic for a different day, or just reach out to Joe directly if you got questions on that. We have some customers that have had Microsoft pay for their POC. Really depends upon the size and, put it bluntly, how much money you spend with Microsoft, if they'll front the cost of the POC. But there's a lot of options. And so if a POC makes sense for you, reach out to Joe, and he can certainly get you in touch with the right team, if that's myself or somebody else at New Era, to kind of walk you through the ins and outs of that.
Awesome. And if I recall, Dan, from start to finish, meaning provisioning the lines and doing all that stuff, it's probably a 2 to 3 week process to get the POC up and running. Is that fair? A little longer, or?
Yeah, 2 to 4 weeks. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So, once we get the order signs, we kick off the PM, and it really boils down to the data collection. In most of the issues we run into for our larger customers, it's going to be working with security for obvious reasons, right? Security needs to make sure that they're not exposing the company to any potential vulnerabilities or security issues. So usually the holdup is going to be getting the ports, protocols, all the things needed to make Microsoft Teams work through the security team. If you're a smaller organization, don't have those same stringent requirements. It's on the 2-week time frame. Larger organization have a little bit more red tape to get through, probably closer to the 4-week timeline.
Great, thank you. So as we move on, Kristen, if you don't mind advancing to Jeremy, we'll share something behind the scenes. So we tested this literally minutes before, and hopefully we can get to Jeremy's demo right now. If we can't, Jeremy, I'll have you maybe just touch upon some of the items here. But with that said, Jeremy, if you're able to, let's start your demo and your topic.
Sure thing. Just would need to have presenter capabilities. Looks like I've got that. I should be off. You should be able to see my screen. So I am Jeremy Morrell, a Senior Solution Architect with New Era, and much of my role is helping customers adapt within the Microsoft ecosystem. And so we are consistently hearing from our customers that Teams has introduced some new challenges to their IT admins. And certainly as you consider all that you're investing in Teams, all the things that Dan just spoke about, this compounds that anxiety. The default settings in Teams allow any user in your company to create their own teams. If you didn't know that, you will find out shortly when you take a look at your SharePoint backend and you look at all these Teams sites that have cropped up. And oftentimes you find that they're creating teams with names that are often cryptic or even inappropriate. And as the adoption gains traction, administrators are going to struggle with understanding which teams are in use, which ones have been abandoned, and at best, the results a polluted list of teams and SharePoint assets, and at worst, it's a data governance nightmare. So what can you do? A successful deployment should involve a couple of key areas. You want to look at group and team creation, who can do it and how they're being classified. You want to look at a expiration, retention, archive policy centered around teams and the artifacts that teams consist of. I alluded to just a moment ago that there's a SharePoint underpinning to teams, and I'll expand on that. But there are a lot of little loose ends that you want to make sure are neatly packaged up, and so just taking a look at that strategy will make sure you're prepared for that. And then also look at managing the individual features. So with the balance of this hour, we'll take a quick review on those key points. So we'll talk first about who can create teams. You want to strike a balance. Teams is most beneficial when there's a good balance between allowing the end users to do what they need to do and not really restricting too much of the functionality, because you want them to enjoy what they're doing. But you also want to stem a rapid increase in the number of teams getting created and abandoned. So the first thing I recommend is to put some parameters on who can create teams. And really, to put a finer point on that, it's who can create groups inside of the O365 and 365 infrastructure. So in my control panel here, I'm looking at groups, and what I've done is I've created, aptly enough, a group called Group Creators. And so my intent here is that anyone that I put in this group will then have permissions to create groups. That might mean that you consider a few key people on your IT team as the gatekeeper for new team creation. And with some of our customers, we put in solutions where we've created a simple form that a user can fill out requesting teams. And we've even automated the workflow so that if it's approved by one of those members, the group creation actually can happen and the team can be created with just a simple yes or a no. So that stops a uncontrolled growth, but it doesn't put too much red tape in the way. So we've taken this group here, and to use this group for the functionality on limiting teams creation, it involves PowerShell. And now if you don't know PowerShell, don't get very concerned on the fact that it's PowerShell, because it's not all that complicated as far as PowerShell goes. There's a link here. You will probably find it as the first item that you Google if you type in the phrase manage who can create groups. But in this document, if you scroll down just a bit, there is a PowerShell command, and what it boils down to is copying and pasting exactly this section of code here and supplying the name of the group. So I called mine Group Creators. So I would just replace that here where it says group name, and then I would run this as someone who has administrative rights in my tenant, and voila, next thing you know, only that group is allowed to create new groups. You'll see when you run this, it's a little hard to see on this screen, but it outputs something that shows this is the group that's allowed. It shows you the internal ID of that group, but you can see that there are various ways to match this. We won't get too deep into that, but you can also see that no one else can create groups once this is set. And instructions here for testing how that works, and you can also reverse that. So if you decide once you get a better handle on Teams, you're ready to sort of open it up and let it be as the Microsoft gods have intended, you can reverse this decision as well. So right away, you put your first parameter control up and you're feeling a little bit better. We'll look at team naming convention, or really group naming convention. So to define that a little bit more, what used to be called an Office 365 group, now it's a Microsoft 365 group. That is the underlying structure. A team consists of that group as well as a SharePoint site, which houses all of the documents and various content that gets uploaded within a team. So if you want to look at the naming conventions, there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it will make sure that the names are appropriate, but also you can find various reasons, such as making sure that something isn't too vague. An example that I will come across a lot of times is consider a company that has multiple locations. So they've got a location in the US and one in Canada and one in France, so on and so forth. If someone creates a team that's just called marketing, well, that's a little vague because you might have a marketing division in each of those centers as well. So you might choose to add location to the team names to automatically make it a little bit more specific. So if we take a look at groups, the settings here on the left-hand side, which is nice, Microsoft recently added these in. You used to only be able to exclusively change them through PowerShell. So this is Microsoft taking pity on those that are a little script diverse. You can come in and you can look at naming policy. And right away, you can put in blocked words, or you could put in a naming policy. We'll look at naming policy first. And what you'll find right away is that it shows you a sample of what your group name would look like. So what's in the brackets here is the name of the group as it was entered by the user. And you can add a prefix or a suffix. So you could add a string as defined by you, so really any arbitrary string, or an attribute. So we could say always attach the company, office, the state. And so if I did something like this, it would be, I'm in New Hampshire here, so you see NH dash group name, and that it would start to build that out. You can set more complex types or even some additional attributes that aren't shown here by using PowerShell. So there is a link. I'll just depart here for a moment. Out here, so if you Google around, and again, these are links that we can also share. If you're interested, you just reach out to Joe or myself. Anyone on this call can apply these, send these links to you. This covers how to do some more advanced things. So it shows you what we just saw there, as well as some PowerShell commandlets for doing some more advanced things as well. Let's talk about block terms. So aside from the obvious things, your kids can teach you some of the words to put in here if you really want to check your blood pressure. Some of the things that you might not consider but would want to certainly vet are terms like CEO, HR, payroll, things that you would want to sort of put some controls around, not having just anyone create a group called that. That way a common user can't say CEO's team, and you then have users thinking that they're in on some secret team that might have been inadvertently left unsecured. Any other nefarious reasons that I probably don't think about? I'm too honest, right, Joe? Let's move on to look at an expiration policy. So Microsoft Teams can show team owners when their team's going to expire, and that is if you set an expiration policy up. The policy can be set for all groups, specific groups, or none of the groups, and then you can pick a particular policy, so 180, 365, or custom if you wanted to go down to, say, 30 days. You would specify a contact for groups with no owners. So in the case that a group was created and maybe the owner has separated from the company, or somehow the group got created and it wasn't assigned to an owner, it could inform an administrator that a group is about to expire. And then again, I could apply it to all, or I could come in and I could select specific groups from my group table. What is nice about that is that when a team is going to expire, it notifies the admin, the owner of that group, and they are allowed to extend that expiration. They're allowed to speak on behalf of the group and say, no, we need another 30 days, 180 days, whatever the window is that you've configured here. Groups that are expired are earmarked for deletion, and you have 30 days. The group owner or the administrator can put a stop to that and enact a extension on the group, or even come in and remove the group from expiring to leave it indefinitely open. So that you do have some options. And then it will either delete or archive that based on some of the options, and we will cover those a little bit in the retention policies. So it's not necessarily permanent, but it keeps your task list clear. It keeps your list of teams manageable to only those things that are actively being used. All right, so Let's shift focus for a minute. We're actually going to look at, ironically enough, the Teams Admin Center. So there's a lot of underlying pieces of the Microsoft ecosystem that involve Teams, and so that's why we sort of started with a weird turn at the Azure Active Directory area. But if we look at our admin centers and head into the Teams specific one, we'll take a look at meeting and messaging policies. So the difference is subtle, but it's there. Meeting policies are used to control what features are available to users when they join a Teams meeting, versus messaging policies, more geared toward those that are internal to your organization, and it controls what chat and channel messaging features are available to using Teams. So take a quick look at meeting policies, and I'm just going to open up the defaults for org-wide. And so you'll see, I refer to these as cat toys, all these toggle switches back and forth, different settings that you can control for whether you want certain options on, how you would like the audio and video features to be handled, different options for content sharing, whether you want to allow anonymous people to start a meeting. This one is one I have been searching for a while, and we used to be able to only control in PowerShell. I like it because it means that someone from the company who initiated the meeting has to be in and signed in before the meeting can officially begin. That way, users are sort of in a waiting room, if you will, until the meeting starts, and they're not just wondering when the meeting's going to start. And then we mentioned messaging policies as well, and there's a different set here. I always start with the org-wide settings because you can use the default org-wide, the default global settings to create your own custom policy. So it's a good way to start here to see how Microsoft intended it to be set up by default, and then you can work backward from that to create your own policies from there. All right, we'll take a look at archival options. So when we talk about archival, team owners can archive a team when it's not active any longer, and they want to keep it around for reference or maybe to reactivate it in the future. So we will look at teams specifically. I've got 3 teams here, and if I want to just look at the settings for those teams, I do so by clicking the gear icon on the bottom of my navigation panel. And then I can see the teams that are under my purview, so I am the owner of these particular teams. And if I drill into any of these, I can see the options, and the one I'm looking for is archive. And so it tells you right here, it'll freeze all the team activity, but you can still add and remove people, and then you can restore it from back in this managed teams. You'll be able to see and restore that. You can also make the underlying SharePoint site read only for anybody that was on there, so they can go to the SharePoint site without having to have the team in their list. You would have to share that link with them if they didn't have it already, but it still means that there's a way to get to the content without having an active team there. So yes, conversations files in the team, they become read-only once it's archived. Users can still go and search through it to see what they need, but all the activity is frozen. A couple of things that I have seen around this, I worked with an organization that used this for their employee onboarding. And what they did is they created a team, got it exactly the way they wanted, uploaded all the materials, had some announcements and things posted in various channels, and used that as sort of a, I think it was an ingenious organization system that they created to categorize and classify all the different pieces of information, but also have users who may not have been exposed to Teams, especially in a workplace environment, come in and learn how to navigate through. And then they archive that team, and what they would do is they would unarchive it, they would add some members to it, maybe make some modifications quarterly, and then they would re-archive it so that it was a static read-only copy of information that worked just like a team. And that's been working well for them for quite a few months now. So that's just one proposed usage of that that shows that it still has some value, even though you can keep it classified differently. You can know that it's archived and it's not actively being updated, so you can have some peace of mind with security around that, and know that it's not going to contain any content you might not know about. All right. Sensitivity labels. So 2 months ago, I would have been preaching the value of classifications for teams and groups. However, that technology is so spring 2021. Sensitivity labels are the current rage, and they replace things you might have heard of like AIP, Azure Information Protection labels, and if you were using them, classifications. And there are scripts available to help you upconvert. So we'll switch gears again, and this time we will look to the Compliance Center to look at the sensitivity labels. So you'll find that information in the Compliance Center under Information Governance. So creating a label, sorry, I'm looking at retention labels. I apologize. Microsoft will occasionally adjust where things are for you. Let me take a peek. I think I clicked on information governance and it was information protection, excuse me. Here I've got some labels that are set up. And so the thing to know about sensitivity labels is you would create them and then use these labels to create policies for retention or other content related requirements. You can use them to restrict access to content by using those labels to apply encryption, and they're scopable. So you can scope it to teams, groups, particular sites, emails, or files. So I might decide that I only want one of these labels to only be pertaining to files or emails versus this label here, confidential, which I want users to be able to utilize across everything, files, emails, sites, and unified groups, or in essence, teams. So there are various reasons we can't dive too deep into those now, but we would be happy to expand on those separately on why you would choose the scope differently there. But suffice to say, if I allow this label to be placed on a group, and we'll take a look at the settings for this, you can see you have various options for marking content. So you can put a watermark on a document. You can have documents auto-labeled by a particular pattern recognition. So for instance, if you've got something that patterns for personal information, credit card numbers, social security numbers, those types of typical patterns, you can specify those and then have this be watching your assets, your files, your emails, your unified groups for things to come up even in a team chat. They will be marked and attached with this label. So that said, you can specify and attach labels to a team as they are created. So if we look at our groups, I previously have created a team called Governance. So Teams Governance. And if I look at the properties, you can see I can assign a sensitivity label. And what that means in the scope of a team is that if I have applied a sensitivity label that had certain actions associated with it, let's take the watermark, for example. That means any document that becomes part of that team is going to get that watermark. Any behaviors that I set, for instance, I could say anything labeled confidential must become an encrypted document. That means that if that is sent to another user, that user has to supply credentials in order to decrypt that. And in usual cases, if it's sent outside the organization to a user who's not in your tenant, they don't have a login, they can't decrypt that and gain access to that document. So it protects you. You can even stop that document from being emailed, stop it from being forwarded, and those are all settings that are controlled in the sensitivity labels area. And then if we apply that label to a team, everything in the team, all of the assets that are related become enforceable here. In teams, you have a ability to control whether or not that team can invite external members, also known as guest users, into the team. And if you set a confidential policy to only allow internal users to interact, then that means the team that is set confidential won't allow any guest users, regardless of if the organization-wide settings would have otherwise permitted them. So it's pretty powerful and allows some more granular control there as well. And
Hey, Jeremy.
yeah,
Oh,
Joe.
I know we're coming up on the hour. I just wanted to maybe ask a couple things here. I guess first of all, this is maybe a tough question to answer in this format, but you and I are working on a project right now where the client's asking us to come in to do really this overall team governance strategy and help them identify what they should be doing. I guess, is that something you're seeing often? And if so, what is the outcome of this exercise with them? What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so yes, we are seeing that pretty often, and it's usually, hey, this is a growing scope of concern for us, and we want to make sure that we're crossing all of our I's and dotting our T's, so to speak. And so we would come in and say what the best practices are, but make sure that we're touching on each of the key areas. For the customer that you're talking about, we even, although some of it is repeat information because of how widely some of the scope of these settings spans, we've taken all of the applications in the Microsoft world and said, for each, we will address these particular questions. Who can create data? Who can share data? How is data stored? How is data retained? And we put these bullet point questions, even if we can answer those by saying, well, we set a security label, a sensitivity label, and it's controlled in all these applications. Well, we'll just reiterate and do that. And so, although it seems a little too verbose for each of those, we've expanded and answered that question for each of those. And so we've created that sort of as a template to make sure that we've addressed the concerns in each of those silos and answer the question, how and where is it controlled, even if but for multiple softwares, it's in the same area.
Awesome. In the beginning, before we started the content, we had the data from the people that registered, and there were a couple answers. One, which was less than 40% of those who thought establishing security policies was important. We have just a few minutes here. Do you have a single or a sentence or two, or maybe a use case where you'd say, geez, we really got to make sure we have those in place, and here's why? Anything you can share?
Well, if you have any sort of reporting for any type of compliance, if you are held to any particular standards, doing these things will get you on the right path to being able to survive an audit of that caliber. Now, some organizations are more stringent about than others, but Microsoft does have some security information centers that can provide your overall health score on these sorts of things. And so these are largely taken right from the low-hanging fruit. If you look at an organization that has done nothing to protect any information other than they set up a tenant and put things into it, their health score would be relatively low. And these are the items that are top 10 things to touch on to make sure that their health score improves dramatically. So that said, these things will prepare you to be able to print off a report out of that center that says, here are the things that we have covered, is what we're doing to address these standards. And you can kind of come to the party prepared there. Yeah, I think that's
Awesome.
about it.
Thank you. If it's okay, maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, and we'll wrap it up after.
Yep, that's about exactly what I've got. So the final topic is to touch on, and it's an important one, is retention. And so to manage or govern this information, everything that we've talked about, it's important admins, they comply proactively with the industry regulations and standards that we just talked about. If you've got a certain standard, NIST compliance, or there's a bevy of other ones that your industry might be subject to, SOX compliance, for instance. They've all got internal policies that require content retention for a minimum period. Example, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act might require you to retain certain types of content for up to 7 years. Reduces the organization's risk in the event of litigation or a security breach by permanently deleting old content that you don't have to keep any longer. And it will make sure that you effectively know what your organization has at any given time. We'll take a quick peek at that, again, in the Compliance Center. So So that is what is newly moved under information governance, and it's under retention policies. I'll just quickly show you what is involved in setting one of those retention policies up. I'll call this, for instance, team content. So you'll see when I'm setting up a retention policy, it looks at all of the things, as I said, all of these different applications, and it has us answer whether we want this particular policy to apply to this. But so I might come in and say, I'm using this just for Teams, so I can shut all of these off, but come in and I can say, Teams channel messages, Teams chats, and what I'm going to specify here is what do I want to do with these artifacts after. Do I want to retain them? Do I want to throw them away after a certain period of time? So one of the things we've heard a lot about is, hey, these Teams messages seem to be hanging out there forever. And while we have adjusted to make sure that what we're saying is appropriate and we would want to see in 10 years, we might find that some of this content gets quickly dated, and we would not want users to be searching back on something that might be outdated information. So given that consideration, you could come in and you could say, all right, let's retain things for 30 days, 1 year. And after that, the slate kind of gets wiped clean when it hits that window for those particular elements. Obviously, this expands a lot wider than Teams, but trying to narrow the focus there, that's one rationale that I could think that we would want to set this up. And it ticks the box for having done that, so you can answer the question, how long are you retaining Teams chats? Oh, I know the answer to that, 30 days. So that's about it. Joe, go right ahead.
Awesome, thanks, Jeremy. And Kristen, if you're able to bring back the screen, that'd be great. If not, we're able to absolutely continue. Thank you. So as we close here, great segue, how can we help? So I think you'll see a couple different things here. Standard offering is a Teams assessment. This is a remote discovery session, as you can see, and really it's a conversation with Jeremy to go over a lot of the items touched upon today. So what do we have in place today for applications? What's the functionality? And back will be provided an executive level findings document, sort of with that Q&A meeting and what the next steps might be. Second offering, Jeremy performs these often. A Teams 101 customer training, and 101 doesn't imply super basic because I think a lot of your folks are past that, but it's really a custom presentation to your environment. So we'll come in, provide some, Jeremy has a boilerplate of content, we'll edit to some degree for your environment, record those sessions so then you can provide them for new hires or folks like that. And Kristen, if you advance, we'll see this is the meeting with Dan to review the current UC platform that you have. What are we trying to accomplish? What are your overall goals relative to Teams Direct routing? And with this, we'll have that meeting with a summary document and a next idea and plan to move forward with. I think the final few slides I wanted to touch upon. Yeah, Kristen, if you just play this out. We won't spend too much time, but this was the video interrupt that Dan was mentioning. Item number 3, bullet number 3, I just want to show there at the bottom. This was a small financial customer that we were able to improve their bandwidth considerably, as you can see, but also reduce their monthly spend, in this case, 35%. And these are through the New Era SIP services. It's really easy to get pricing on that. Just contact your rep. They can go find out what that would be like. And we're really excited at the back end because I think we're going to provide a higher level of service for you. But again, really easy to do. Just wanted to demonstrate that in case there's interest. I think folks, that's about it. Again, on the survey, you can indicate if you want to take advantage of any of those. And if you have questions, please reach out to your rep. Reach out to me if you'd like, or anyone on this presentation. Dan and Jeremy, before we close out, any final comments from you guys?
Yeah, this is Dan. Happy to help with any questions on Teams, direct routing, really anything. Any questions on anything, reach out to us and we're happy to help. Thanks for your time, Joe. Thanks everyone for your time as well.
Thank you. Ardell, thank you so much for joining today, and I'm sure we'll see invitations for future webinars. Have a great day.